Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. Today's guest is Ned Johnson, who's one of my favorite human beings and also a parenting expert extraordinaire. He's the author of The Self-Driven Child and What Do You Say? You've probably heard me talk a lot about Ned if you haven't heard him on the podcast before. And his work has just been so influential on my work and on my parenting. And I honestly, the ideas behind The Self-Driven Child and What Do You Say are just so helpful and wonderful for raising kids who are independent and successful in today's world. Ned and I go deep into talking about raising kids who have good stress tolerance, who can handle whatever life throws at them, about managing anxiety, our anxiety and our kids' anxiety. We talked about how to build motivation in kids and how really, it's not our job. It's our job to support them, but they have to be intrinsically motivated. And how do you do that? We also talked about screen time and some ways to do some motivational interviewing with kids to help them really learn to regulate their own screen time, because we know that when they leave home, nobody's going to be there saying, turn it off or get off your phone or anything like that. This was, as I said, I love talking to Ned. And I also wanted to let you know that coming up, today's June 12th, the day this podcast is coming out. Coming up 1 week from today on June 17th, I'm going to be doing a workshop on raising kids with great self-esteem or healthy self-esteem or however you want to look at it inside my membership. I want to give you the opportunity to join the membership for this month of June and join us for the Raising Kids with Healthy Self-Esteem workshop. And also Ned is coming in. So if you like Ned, that's why I'm putting this opportunity here in this podcast. If you like what you hear from Ned, join us inside the membership. He's coming in to do a Q&A with our members about raising kids with healthy self-esteem. And if you listen to this podcast, he knows what he's talking about. Ned's Q&A is going to be on June 24th at noon Eastern. If you can't make either the Q&A or the workshop live, they're both going to be recorded and you won't miss a thing, even if you can't make it live. So if you would like to join us for the month, you'll have the opportunity to leave before the next month or stay on with us, of course, if you want to. I've got the doors to the membership open right now. You can go to reimaginepeacefulparenting.com/membership to join us for this month of June so that you can take advantage of the workshop that I'm doing on raising kids with healthy self-esteem, the Q&A that Ned is going to be doing on the same topic, and also to take advantage of the group coaching office hours, if you like, that are left this month. So head over to reimaginepeacefulparenting.com/membership. You can join us just for the rest of the month and no obligation to stay on after that if you want to take advantage of the activities and workshops that are going on inside the membership this month. Okay, so let's meet Ned. Hey, Ned, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Sarah, thanks a bunch. It's great to see you.
You've now tied with Lynn Lyons, who's been on the podcast 3 times, and this is your 3rd time on the podcast. So you're 2 of my favorite people, and I'm happy to have you back.
I consider myself in good company. She's terrific.
She is terrific. And so first time you came on, we talked more about your first book that you wrote with Bill Stixelred, The Self-Driven Child. And this time I wanted to focus on your most recent book, which I know has been out for a little while, but we'll put a link to that in the show notes, called What Do You Say? How to Talk with Kids to Build Stress Tolerance, Motivation, and a Happy Home.
Yeah.
So I want to focus a little bit more on that today. So I guess maybe we could just start out by you telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do before we dive into the topic.
Sure. Apart from being a dad to 2 terrific, no longer teenagers, which is crazy to me, I run a company that helps kids get into college. So we help kids through academic stuff and test prep and all that kind of jazz. And I've been, since 1993, working one-on-one with teenagers. And so I've probably spent something north of 50,000 one-on-one hours with kids. And so like all great teachers, I just really like teens. I have the opportunity to do this one-on-one. So get to pay, it makes it a little bit easier for me, I suspect, to pay attention to when words land and when words don't land. So that's kind of my day job. And then I moonlight, of course, as a parenting author with my pal, Bill Stickshoot, is a clinical neuropsychologist. And we've been bopping around together for about a decade now, trying to share some of the things that we think are helpful to kids and people who care about kids, and helping them be on their paths and get back on paths when they stumble a little bit, which is part of the process.
Yeah. And I think especially now with sort of all the changes that have come because of COVID, I think this is even more important. Parents' anxiety being higher and the world changing too. I think that having parenting skills to raise a self-driven child is even more important today than it may ever have been because of how the world is.
I think that's right. I think that's very well said.
Yeah. And your love for teenagers comes through in your book, and not a day goes by where I don't use something that I've learned from you, either personally or professionally. So thank you. And I only have one teenager left. My middle son, today is his 20th birthday.
Oh, happy birthday to him.
Yeah. He's great. He moved out a month ago and he came home last night for his birthday dinner, and he lost 13 pounds in a month because of not having mom's cooking.
Oh.
He was not trying to lose weight. He's just, he doesn't eat as much when he has to buy his own food, I guess, is the key.
These things happen.
Yeah.
These things happen.
Okay, so let's dive in. So very big question, and you take it where you want, but what is stress tolerance? And I guess further to that, how can we help kids increase their stress tolerance?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, part of this came out of, for a long while, one of the kind of mild mistakes I think that we think has been made with folks who have anxiety is to help them avoid the things that they're anxious. And the challenge is that doesn't tend to make things better. It actually reinforces the fear of the thing. And so stress tolerance is really just the ability to experience something that's intense, that's stressful, that causes anxiety, and then be able to come back to baseline, to come back to equilibrium. And if you think, so for example, my twin brother is a paramedic. And so he deals with really, really hard stuff. But because of what he's learned and because of his experience, he is one of those people who runs right at problems. The most of us go, oh my goodness, right? And it's not that it's not intense. It's not that it isn't, stressful for him. But he doesn't, he'll get super engaged and super, vigilant to whatever he's attending to. And then when it passes, he'll come back to baseline and talk about the baseball game or whatever it happens to be. And so this is what we want. A healthy nervous system is one that responds with appropriate intensity to whatever the demands being placed on it. And then once that stressor is passed, comes back again to a lower level of stress. And that's really what we really want any of us to have, because if you stay in that heightened state, even after the stressor is gone, it's really bad on your nervous system. And then, of course, what happens is people, if they don't feel they can bounce back from this, then they naturally want to avoid the thing that's stressful. And you can end up, the world in which you operate will get narrower and narrower and narrow. And it's just not what we want for kids. And so in some ways, rather than keep the kids safe, what we want to do is help them feel brave, that they can handle hard things. And you only learn to handle hard things, regrettably, by handling hard things. And so that's what a lot of this book is about, is how, both with our actions and perhaps more so with our communication, how do we help kids feel, rather than feeling safe, how do we help them feel courageous? Because the tendency in making kids feel safe is to try to protect them from everything. And that, short term makes a ton of sense with, the 2 or 4-year-old. But over time, we want kids to learn to feel that they can protect themselves rather than mom or dad or other adults doing that for them.
Yeah. So 2 things. One, it made me think of Lynn Lyon's quote that anxiety is an overestimation of the problem and an underestimation of the resources that we have to deal with it.
That's a great way to think about that.
Isn't that a good one? And I think that what you're talking about is helping our kids recognize and learn to get those resources, recognizing that they already have some, or that how to develop those resources if they don't have them. And then the second thing I wonder is, do you see a difference between resilience and stress tolerance, or do you think those are pretty similar?
Well, there are 2 things. I mean, one, stress tolerance is really just, I suppose, kind of the maximum level that you can handle. And then resilience is how do you bounce back, and really how quickly do you bounce back? So those really are, there's a good question, and those are separate things. What's the maximum you can handle? And if if you think about the sort of chemistry definition of resilience, of the ability to return to a previous shape, that's what that's what we really want. And of course, you have to kind of get twisted out of shape or bent out of shape, and then bend back. And so we want both of those things.
That makes sense. So how can we, I mean, I know you've got an entire book about it. We're not going to get it all in one podcast interview, but what are some ways that you see parents, you already mentioned one way of decreasing stress tolerance, which is making accommodations and letting kids avoid the things that make
Right,
them
right, right, right.
anxious or stressed. What are some ways that as parents we can help kids to develop more stress tolerance?
Well, one of the things with I'll add a point to. Well, there's a chapter in a book where we do a bit of a deep dive on the space program. If you know this, Ellie Leibowitz, and for folks who don't know, it's really terrific, and it's supportive parenting of anxious childhood emotions. And I just want to put a note on this. When we talk about making accommodations, it either tends to be one of two things. Either I'm desperately afraid of flying, so I'll get my whole family to agree that we'll only do road trips where we can drive or take a train or whatever. Right? Or you'll check my paper umpteenth times because I feel such a need to be perfect on all of my homework assignments. And short term, that makes a ton of sense, but long term, what it's doing is reinforcing that the thing that I'm afraid of, I really should be afraid of it because everyone else is doing the dance as well to protect me from it. Or as an accommodation, we will soothe kids and reassure them over and over and over and over. And that too is sort of buying into their narrative of how things are. And so Dr. Leibowitz and his colleagues developed this program that's really based on principles of nonviolent resistance with the idea that, as parents, you can't make kids, you can't make them engage in CBT if they don't want to. You can't make them have exposure therapy. But what they found was by making supportive statements, which are really two steps. It's one, it's validating the thing that they're anxious about and then expressing confidence. And so listen, kiddo, I get that it makes you really anxious if you do anything less than your best work. And I love how committed you are to really wanting to do well and put your best foot forward and make your teacher proud. I get it. But, I've been acting like you aren't strong enough to handle making mistakes or having less than an A on something. And I used to think that was, I used to think that was true. And I understand why I feel this way. But I'm also 100% confident that if you do fall short of your mark, that you can handle that, even though it's going to be upsetting to you. So I'm not trying to talk kids out of, well, everybody gets a B plus, kiddo. I don't try to talk kids out of their feelings. I just validate they have a reason to feel the way that they feel, but also that I'm confident that they can handle if they come to it. Now, they may not agree with you at all. Oh my gosh, you have no idea. I'm never getting into Harvard, whatever. And the idea of nonviolent resistance is we don't try to change your kid. You just say, this is the way that I see it. And there's a whole book about how to, if you've been in the process of making accommodations, how you gently make a plan to change that. But by simply saying, I'm not afraid of whatever it is that you're stressed about, it's a drip feed message that maybe they don't have to be as afraid about that as well. Or at least I'm not reinforcing you really should be afraid about this. I mean, other things they're obviously simple things like we don't want to do for kids what they can do for themselves, right? The first chapter of the book is about empathy and validation. And part of when we think about anxiety, really at a clinical level, it's not that a clinician is trying to help a kid, deal better with, public speaking or, flying a plane or whatever. What they're really trying to do is help kids become more comfortable or less uncomfortable with feeling uncomfortable. Meaning, to learn to tolerate, it's really about the hard feelings because at first kids are trying to avoid the dog or the flying. And then what they're trying to do is avoid the discomfort that they feel. And so the first chapter of our book is about empathy and validation, where we were actually talking with a bunch of high school kids and we asked them, who do you feel closest to in the world? And, sometimes my mom is my dad, but my grandma, my teacher, my coach, whatever. And we asked them, what is it about them that makes you feel close to them? And what they came out with either, well, they don't tell me what to do all the time, or they don't judge me when they talk to me. So when I talk, share whatever, they don't judge me. And it's those things sound so simple, but curiously, we actually fall into a trap. And the trap is this, and I'll come back to you kind of what are the things that we can do. The trap is this, that when your kid or anyone you care about brings you a problem, there's something called the rating reflex, where your brain naturally starts going, well, what about this? Sir, you could try this, you could try that, you could try the other thing. Or, oh my gosh, it's only seventh grade. I mean, everybody, and it makes sense. But in step one, I'm trying to come up with a solution to the thing that's currently hard for you. Step two, I'm trying to move you through those hard feelings, right? Because I don't want you to be upset. I want you to feel better. So I'm trying to give you a way to think about this differently. The challenge is in both of those things, it can feel a tad invalidating, meaning if only you would have done one of these three things that immediately popped to my mind, sir, you wouldn't be in this pickle, you dope. Or you really shouldn't be as upset about this as you are. If only you looked at the way that I would, you wouldn't be upset. And if you're on the receiving end, you're like, are you kidding me? When you use empathy and validation, which is simply, oh my gosh. So there's a story in the book, we were out in Palo Alto, and we got an email the next day from a mom who'd come home to find her seventh grader in tears, just totally spun up. Mom, I'm weakest point all in seventh grade, and she said, normally would have said, oh my goodness, that can't possibly be true. There are other boys who, or you're so good at math. I mean, you don't have to be great at everything, or we'll get a coach and all those kind of things that we would normally want to do.
Make them feel better. Yeah.
Because we're wired to want to help solve problems for kids or to soothe them. And so instead what she did and said, holy cow, the weakest kid. Boy, here's the empathy. You're really upset about this, huh? The validation part. God, I'd be upset too if I felt like everyone else is getting big and strong and I'm not there yet. That's got to be hard. And kind of went back and forth using reflective listening. And he eventually kind of dried his tears and gave mom a hug and went to bed. And the next day he comes down to breakfast with a plan, with a written plan for how he thinks he can gain strength. And then enlist his mom's help with this. And so what we do when we use this empathy and validation, resist the temptation to start solving the problems. When we calm people's hard emotions, not by logic or solutions, but by when they feel like we're really understanding where they're coming from. When we calm those hard emotions, calms the amygdala of the stress response, brings the prefrontal cortex back online, makes it easier for kids to come up with a solution, as this boy did, but also makes it easier for people to be emotionally flexible, another executive function, right? And for themselves to reframe things. It also, in a subtle way, conveys to kids, hey, I'm okay when you're less than your best. I can handle your hard feelings. And by conveying that I can handle your hard feelings, it's also conveying that these are feelings that can be handled, which again is a way, in a subtle way, of conveying to kids that these are normal feelings. Of course you're upset. Of course I'd be upset too. And so it seems like a subtle thing because parents are often, what do I want to do? But so much of, when you have an infant, it's our job in some ways to kind of soothe them, right? But over time, a child who can't learn to soothe himself is really not in a good place in the world. And so part of it is just, you kind of hang out with people when they're feeling really yucky about stuff and go, yeah, that sucks.
I love that you went to empathy because, that's so central to the work that I do with parents
Oh,
as
yes.
well. And it can be so hard to do, right? One thing that you may have outright said this in the book, but I don't know if you did, but the empathy also really helps people want to calm down too, right? And get back into their prefrontal cortex, which then is that, I think that's part of what helps them go into the problem-solving mode.
So that's such a good point.
Yeah,
Yep.
where they get that, they're back in their thinking brain and they're going to the problem-solving mode. And I think if we do the opposite of empathy and try to, even for the best possible reasons, dismiss their upset, it tends to raise the level of upset, right? Because no, you don't understand. This is really bad. I am the weakest boy in seventh grade or whatever it is. So empathy is such an important skill, and it's so hard to overcome that, as you say, that writing reflex. And I know I've worked on my husband for 30 years. It's not go into the writing reflex when I come to him with a problem. So I think it's also helpful to remember, just not even parents and kids, but that is our tendency to try to want to fix it or tell people that, it's not that bad or whatever when they come to us with a problem.
It's so true. And part of that too is the ambivalence, right? If I'm really upset about something, I don't want to stay in that place forever, right? But I want to be able to, feel sorry for myself for a spell and lick my wounds for a spell. But I also don't want to stay in that place of being most upset. But if you think about it, a kid who's upset about, bombing a test or whatever, right? He has reasons to be mad about bombing the test and what it means about his future. And do people think he's a dope and blah, older brother and all that kind of jazz, right? But he also wants to think that, well, it's one test, I'll get over it, I'm good at other things, right? So we've got these mixed feelings about it. And what so often happens with the rating reflex is when we argue one side of the equation, this will be fine, you'll get past this, you've got another opportunity. They go back and argue the other side of the equation, right? And so curiously, when we paradoxically perhaps we say, boy, yeah, that's pretty tough. You worked really hard on the test, and boy, a lousy grade, that must be pretty hard for you. Kids are rather than say, yeah, I'm gonna be successful in life, I'm gonna live in a cardboard box down the river, they're likely to say, yeah, it's really stinky. But it's exactly you said, but I know there's another test, and maybe I can work a little bit harder next time because children have brains in their heads. They want their lives to work out. And so they don't want to be stuck in a place that's stinky, right? They want to move out of that. And when we don't try to drag them out of it, they don't try to pull the other direction and climb right back into that hole.
Yeah. One thing I loved about your book, which is it's actually given me some answers because I have had parents ask me this before, is what if they don't get out of that hole? Like you talk a few times in the books about kids who get stuck in the loop of negative thinking. And I love, maybe you could share those phrases that you share in the book of what to say to a child who is stuck in that loop of negative thinking.
Well, so presuming that you've had a loop of several times and patiently, using validation, and I see why you're here, and really taking the emotionally, I learned this from you, of course, emotionally taking the kid's perspective, on a negative, on a natural consequence. But if they feel like they're just sort of stuck in a position where they just want to beat themselves up and torment them, to say something like, "Well, gosh, sweetheart, I can see you're really still upset about this. I feel like we've gone through this a bunch of times, and I understand where you're coming from, but I feel like we're kind of stuck in a loop, and I'm just not sure that this is a constructive conversation for us to keep having the same one over and over." And then you can, say, is there a way that we can shift and shift our thinking? Is there something else that I can be doing? Because I don't want to keep having a conversation if it doesn't feel like it's to you, if it doesn't feel, or to me, feel like it's helpful. I would caveat that in a big time way, though, if a kid is depressed and not diagnosed, or depressed and diagnosed, you have to recognize that or anxious, that by definition, their thinking is disordered, right? And so if they're not currently getting the therapeutic help that would be advised with anyone who's anxious or depressed, you really want to do this, because it's really not a credible path for a parent to be both mom or dad and be a therapist, right? You can outsource a lot of things, you can enlist a lot of help, but you don't want to pivot in trying to be the therapist if it's the expense of just being that anchor, emotional anchor, being mom or dad. And in part because when your kid is really anxious, because stress is so contagious, you're likely to get anxious as well. And it will be harder for any of us to navigate that kind of minefield of emotions. And so if you feel like it can just keep blowing up over and over and over, that's where spend a little more time listening to Sarah, picking up some of her perspective, and enlisting the help of a parent coach or a psychologist. But I'll say then, I see kids who are stuck in being depressed oftentimes for years. And the way that I think about this as a person who was depressed a lot in my teenage years and even into college, that the way that I see this is that the number of years that it takes a person to sort of slowly sink from, shiny happy into a kind of a depressed version of themselves is likely to take as much time to fully heal up and come out the other side. And so one of the things that can be challenging if you've not experienced this yourself, or you just don't know about it, is the really up and down this, right? You've got a kid who's depressed, and then they pop up and they're like, wow, and everything's shiny happy, and they're back to their old self. You're like, oh my goodness. And then the next day they go right back underwater and you're like, what happened? And you just want to know that that's typical. That's typical. And I always think about mountain climbing, right? Sometimes you're going up and you're going down. Over time, you're climbing to the top, but it's not like every step is an upward direction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And a few minutes ago, you mentioned being a non-anxious presence, and there's a chapter in this book, chapter in your last book about that as parents. And I think that I love that you were talking about that in the context of empathizing, because I think we do have to check in with ourselves, like, that mom you were talking about, like, oh my gosh, is he really the weakest boy in 7th grade? And is he going to be scarred for life? And we have to like check in with ourselves and remind ourselves not to catastrophize, and that, to really take care of our own anxiety before we can show up for our kids.
Oh, it's such a good point. And not only catastrophizing, but we make, Daniel Kahneman, the thinking fast and slow, we make fortune telling errors. And we extrapolate. I was just talking with a really neat family the other day, and the girl's ADHD and she's anxious. She was just diagnosed with autism. Socially, things are hard, blah, blah, blah. Procrastinates like crazy. And she's in 9th grade, and mom said, well, I just don't understand how she's ever going to be successful in life if she keeps doing things the way that she is. And I said, respectfully, she's 14, right? Her brain is still under development. And she's a super bright kid, but she's doing the best that she can with the parts that she's got. And I just don't think it's credible to think that at age 16 and 18 and 20 and 22, she's going to be doing things the exact same way that she is. But we sit there, picture a 14-year-old, heading off to work, and professional, but it's going to be a different environment, but your kid is also going to be different. And I say that because when things aren't going well for our kids, our fears are almost never about the present. They're about the future. Oh my gosh, their best friend broke up when they have no friends. They'll never have friends. And what will that be like? And you're picturing them like never going to anyone's wedding. You just imagine, living in a box down by the river kind of thing. And it almost never happens that way because brains develop, and again, kids want their lives to work out. So my daughter, this is to me, I'll share this story. My daughter middle school was really hard, and, struggled with friends, and then lost friends and didn't have any friends for 2.5 years straight. And then anxiety that she'd had as a kid got worse and worse. And and every year we're thinking this year will be better. And then ultimately she ended up with full school refusal for the last 3 months of 8th grade. Just, we're just trying to limp to the end of the year, and she couldn't make it, and she just pieced out. No, I'm a guy who helps the people get into college. Like, what's my inner monologue? We're just about to start high school, and like, holy smokes. And we didn't understand then what we understand now. She got diagnosed at age 19 with autism. So it was all this inner struggle, but I knew, and as did a lot of other folks, could pick up on the anxiety, but the neuropsych evaluation she had in 8th grade, they didn't pick up on the subtle presentation of autism that she had, but she had all the struggles tied to it. And so I remember we were out for a walk. This is in the spring of her 8th grade year. And she's just, it's hard. Everything's hard, right? She's out of school. She has no friends. She's feeling crummy about her. She's just feeling lousy about the world and her place in it. And I said, listen, kiddo, I said, I know this is hard. Everything that you want to be good, it's not. And I said, but if I may, I said, you are going to contribute to the world in really cool ways. And you're going to really need friends. You are creative as all get out. You are smart as a tack. You're absolutely vicious at board games. He's got this brilliant mind. I said, you're going to have this really great life. And she said, it sure doesn't feel that way. And I said, I know it does. And you're right. And it's hard. And I said, but I don't like to play, I know better than you, but I've been around the sun a few more times than you are. And quick reminder that your dad, spent 3 months of 7th grade in a pediatric psychiatric hospital. And my parents are blah, blah, blah. And, I've been pretty open with my kids about the stuff that I went through. And I said, I don't know how it's going to get better. I don't, but I'm pretty confident that it will, because you're kind, creative, smart, blah, 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 blah. And so she was really bumpy, ended up with a bunch of medical stuff all through high school, started university her first year, was there for 3 days, said, I can't do this, came home, got the diagnosis of autism, kind of regained her energy, had this year, her second start at her first year of college, and just crushed it. I mean, it's hard to, it's just, well, I'm only supposed to take 5 classes. Would you be willing for me to take a 6? Because I really want to do this other thing. I'm like, who are you? I mean,
Yeah.
right? And so, particularly if you've got a kid where friends are hard and school is hard and emotional regulation is hard and on it goes, it is hard as a parent not to catastrophize. But I have friends in town, and I was sharing this story. I have this little kind of fire pit out behind our house. And I said, for almost every day for the 3 months that my daughter was home, I would get up and have breakfast with my wife. I start work a little bit later because I run this company. I have breakfast with her, walk the dog. She'd go off to work. I'd go out back behind the house. It was really cool in the spring. I'd make a little fire. I'd sit there, read the rest of the paper, and then I would just meditate, and I've never meditated more in my life than I did in those 3 months. I mean, I practice TM, so usually it's 20 minutes twice a day, and it was like an hour and a half every day because I'm like, a lot of things I can't fix.
That's such a healthy coping strategy. Can I also just say that? So some people might have gone to more unhealthy coping strategies.
Yeah, it's so true. And so I'm like, my part of my job is to be a stress sponge. And if I want her to credibly feel that somehow this is going to work out better, it helps a lot if I'm not worried sick. And I say, it's just the path that you're on. And right now it's really stinky. This is so hard for you. And this is hard for me. And I'm confident.
Again, back to that, reflecting back to our children that they can handle whatever they're going through, right? I saw a funny thing the other day about how you look to the flight attendant when there's turbulence. And if she's running back to her seat doing the sign of the cross, there's trouble. Yeah. But if she's continuing, or he or they or whatever, continuing to pour coffee, then that turbulence, you're like, oh, it's going to be okay. And, I actually remember conversations very similar to that with my dad giving me that same talk that you gave your daughter at hard times in middle school. And similar conversations I've had with my daughter. And it is hard to hold the space, but I also just want to highlight how many adults I have heard from who said, I was relentlessly bullied in middle school, or I went through this really difficult period. And the only reason that I made it through, or that that my self-esteem wasn't totally destroyed, was because my parents still believed in me and still gave me that unconditional positive regard of who I was as a person.
Yeah.
And like so much that this kind of parenting, I think that, empathetic, I'll just say empathetic parenting, confident parenting is just so important for getting kids through those hard times with feeling okay about themselves, even if the world is not reflecting that back to them.
It's so true. One of the things that to add to that is for, again, just to remind folks that if you've got a kid who's depressed, that by definition, irritability is just part of them. And it's hard to love people when they're prickly. When I'm depressed, I am not an easy person to live with, right? My beloved wife, and she's like, and it's like hugging a porcupine, right? And in some ways, for teens especially, they're trying to individuate, right? And typically, at least for me, when I'm depressed, I just kind of want to be in my cave and just leave me alone, right? And of course, I'm saying that, but I don't really want to be left alone. I want people to keep coming and checking in on me. And it's a hard role as a parent to do that. And the second thing is that we have a natural tendency, again, that writing reflex, to think if only this were going better, right? If school, if friends, if whatever, and to recognize that the school and friends and all those kind of things, they're not typically the cause of the challenge with mental health and hard feelings. They're the symptom, right? Kids who are depressed and prickly, they're going to have a hard time doing school, right? Because the executive functions are a disaster. They're people who they might be friends with aren't exactly attracted to people when they're prickly like that. And so one point that we have in that chapter about a non-anxious presence, in addition to taking the long view, is to really make it a high priority just to love your kid and enjoy their company in whatever way you can, because we feel like we need to pay attention. We have to put all of our energy into fixing the thing that's not going well. And to paradoxically, if instead just put your energy into just loving on your kid, like they're the coolest thing in the world, even though, everything is messy. The room is messy. Their life is messy. Their grades, everything's messy. And you can still love people even when they're just a hot mess. And it's when you change that energy, that's the thing that actually makes it easier for them to muster a little more courage, a little more energy, a little more executive functions to do the work themselves of cleaning up things a bit and moving in a better direction. And so it's a little paradoxical, but the messier they are, the more you want to love them, which is people are like, are you crazy? Well, no, I don't think so.
You're not crazy. And I think one thing that I've been thinking about recently that I think would help parents who are listening to this when they do see their kid who's like maybe messing up or, making bad decisions or, for whatever reason, is to remember that there are always other people in the world who are going to point out their flaws and and also teach them things that they need to know and teach them
Yep.
lessons, but there isn't anybody else in the world who's going to love them like we love them, and that really just focusing on, rather than trying to mold them and change them to be, out in the world in the way that we think is best, that really that can happen. That'll happen on its own. And we can just loving them is our job. That's how I think
Such a
about
good
it.
point. I had an interview with a woman named Katie Broadbent. I don't know if you know her. She's she's the chief empowerment officer for a group called Prenda, which here in the States helps parents set up micro schools. She's also has the moniker of Adventure Katie. She is just amazing human. And she has her kids are like 6 and 8 or something like that. And she says, I have these 3 blocks. It's a love block, it's a trust block, and it's an approval block. And she said, sometimes kids do things where they lose my trust, and then we kind of work on how do we rebuild that, or lose my approval. Like I didn't really love the way they did that. She said, but the love block, she says, I have this on this table and it's glued to the table. You can't move it.
That's awesome.
Isn't that great?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. So just shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about motivation.
Mm.
And, what I just said to you before about our job for us as parents, that's actually not a bad segue into talking
Yeah.
about motivation, because I think oftentimes we think it is our job to motivate our kids to want to be successful and want to achieve things. And can you just talk a little bit about how you see motivation, and how I know from reading your book that you don't think it's our job to motivate kids. And so just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So our North Star is something called self-determination theory. And it's a model of intrinsic motivation, not working hard, but wanting to work hard, wanting to develop themselves, wanting to contribute to the world, wanting. And it holds that there are 3 psychological needs to need to be met. One is sense of competency. So you don't have to be the best, but if you feel incompetent, you want to run away from it because it's so threatening to feel incompetent. Actually, when I was talking with Katie, I made the point that arguably for children, the most stressful thing they can experience in school is having to read out loud. And she said, I can still remember when I was in first grade and everyone read 4 lines and I counted, where was I? There were 11 people and I counted off and they went all the way down the line. And I sat there and I practiced my 4. I didn't pay attention to anything for the next 17 minutes. And because I was not a strong reader. And I've had people, person after person after person tell me that. So competency, I'll come back to that in a moment, a sense of relatedness or connection, and a sense of autonomy. And so this autonomy is really the most important one, in part because the longer kids are in school, the less autonomy they have. But what often happens for us as parents, and when we start leaning on kids about their homework or getting the grades up or whatever, unintentionally, we think that if we help them do more homework and get better grades, that they're going to feel more confident, competent, and then they'll feel more confident and they'll want to work hard at this. But curiously, you can in one fell swoop undermine all 3 of those. Obviously, you undermine autonomy if I'm on top of you to make you do your homework. It certainly shifts me from being the loving, supportive parent to like the homework police, and that's going to work against the relatedness. But it also undermines a sense of competency because you're saying, I think the work is good enough. And I'm saying the heck it is. You got to put more in at this. Now, objectively, the work that your kid is doing may not meet the mark, but exactly as you just said, Sarah, they're going to get that feedback from school. Hey, these are questions you missed. I'd like to look at this again. And what we really want to do is have our kids work with us and come to us rather than us being in charge of it. And it's one of the things that's important to note is for little kids, they will typically sacrifice their autonomy for the relatedness because mom and dad really are the center of their universe in many ways. And they're not old enough to fend for themselves. They can't imagine living any place other than at home. They don't have credit cards or jobs or anything like that, right? But when kids start to be 13, 14, 15, and they're starting to, if not literally, at least in their imagination, imagine life beyond mom and dad, right? They're individuated and imagine how they would navigate their life. And so a child who has had a really domineering parent who has swallowed it and kind of, okay, dad, okay, fine, okay, fine, and sacrifice their autonomy so they don't have their parents blow up and lose that relatedness. Kids like that tend to make up in spades. And all of a sudden they go from being these dutiful, compliant children to doing everything that a parent or other concerned adult would not want them to do because they have this huge autonomy deficit.
Right.
And they make it up in ways that are I mean, kind of crazy making. And children need to feel that it's not, we write in the book, it's not that children deserve responsibility. They need responsibility. They need to feel that this is their life, that this is their responsibility, that these are their obligations. And when we as parents step in to do things for them, it's given the message that someone other than them is responsible for their schoolwork, keeping the room clean, whatever it happens to be. And we really want kids to experience these things at the youngest possible age, so they get an accurate model of reality of who's responsible for what. So that's our big North Star with that. The second thing, to the point you made, that it's not our job to motivate kids. It can be a very, well, I would say that is one thing that we do want to do is work hard on trying to help kids find their own motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And there's in that same chapter with Ellie Leibowitz, it's a chapter called The Language and Silence of Change. We also do a deep dive on something called motivational interviewing. And for people who don't know, it was created by a couple psychologists in the 80s who were working with problem drinkers. Going back to that ambivalence I was talking about before, if I'm really hitting the bottle, as my friend just saying, Ned, man, you really probably want to cut it down. I mean, your old man, that ended up so badly for him, and Vanessa's going to leave you, and it's bad for your liver, on and it goes, right? But what happens is, because I had this ambivalence, there's probably a reason why I'm drinking too much, and there are plenty of good reasons why I should knock it off. But as my friend, if you start telling me all the reasons why I should not, I'll start telling you in my head at least all the reasons I should, and I'll fight you. Sir, you don't know what you're talking about. I got this. It's no big deal. I'm perfectly fine. Blah, 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 blah.
Is that about, sorry, just a quick interruption. Is that about trying to keep autonomy, do you think?
Yes. Well, because being told what to do is a low sense of control is so doggone stressful. I mean, that's, the central thesis of the self-driven child. This is Sonia Lupian, that a low sense of control is the most stressful thing you can experience. And you're right. I mean, then we have these both sides of it. If I'm going to move towards drinking less, I want to do it for me of my own accord, right? Rather than because you're, put that down. It doesn't work very well. So what motivational interviewing does is ask three things. That's open-ended questions, use reflective listening, and then wait for change talk. So the story that's in our book, a friend of ours who's a school counselor caught wind of a girl who was smoking a ton of weed, and she came to her, and the first thing we do is you take force off the table. And she said, I'm not going to try to talk you out of smoking weed. You're a smart kid. I know you understand it, but what I'd love to, if I may, I'd really like to understand, your perspective on it. I mean, can you tell me a little bit, what do you get out of it? And the girl waxes rhapsodic about, the girl she hangs out with, they're really funny, they're cool. She's never felt cool before. She feels funny. She's less relaxed. She's less stressed. She's more relaxed, blah, 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 blah. Our friend uses, again, reflective listening, kind of repeats it all back to her. So you're saying is you really like the way you feel and they like the kids. Yeah, that's right. They kind of go back and forth this a number of times. And the girl then says, it is kind of expensive though. This is the change talk, right? And this is where it'd be easy to pounce on that. But again, doesn't do that. So, well, tell me more about that. What do you mean? Well, I buy a couple times a week and it uses pretty much all the money that I've got. And so that's all I'm kind of doing. Repeats it back, reflective listening. Next open-ended question. Well, if you had more money, what would you do with it? Oh, I haven't got my hair cut in a while. My friend Sarah's got these really cute shoes, but I get them in red. Yeah, that'd be cool. Those, and they're really neat. I like those kicks. And so again, this process back and forth. And the girl, note, she's articulated her own reasons to stop smoking pot. Our friend, knowing this process well, doesn't lean on it. Thanks her for being so open, for sharing time with her, and sort of bids her farewell. And she sees her a couple weeks later and she's got her hair bobbed. And she's like, hey, tell me about that. Oh, well, I only bought once the last couple of weeks. So then I saved up some money, got my hair cut. Do you like it? I do. It looks really good on you. And the girl had found her own reasons. By the end of the semester, she'd given up smoking weed. And she said, I like these kids. They're really funny. They're cool, but they really don't take school very seriously. And I kind of do want to take school seriously. And what happens is when kids are in that, when we tell them all the reasons again, they'll tend to, no, you don't understand it. And they'll cling to their friends and they'll cling to the smoking. And we put this chapter in here because while we do a really deep dive on motivation in the self-driven child, one thing that we had not occurred to us at the time is that a lot of times when people are saying, how do I motivate my kid? What they're really saying is, how do I change my kid? Particularly if they've been stuck in a hard place for a long while, like that question you asked before about kind of the negative loop of, oh, poor me. And the challenge is, the reality is, we can't change people against their will. You can't do it. What you can do is help them if they want to change. And if you're deft about it, you can help them find their own reasons to motivate for change.
I love that. What you said something about, you talked about competence as being part of the self-determination theory, even, which is what leads to that intrinsic motivation. And one thing that jumped out at me when I was just rereading your book was you talked about how video games can give kids a sense of competence, and that's what is partly what makes them so attractive and so hard to convince kids that they should play less video games.
Right.
And I have to say, like, I am becoming sort of more, this is like a total sidebar, but I am becoming more and more concerned about how much kids are on screens. And I don't think screens are evil, but as you said in the book, like they do, it's what they take away from in terms of if you're doing too much, if you're on screens too much. So maybe just sort of our last topic, you could talk a little bit about screens and sort of your take on helping kids to have a more balanced screen use, quite honestly.
Yeah, no, certainly, if people probably know the book that just came out, The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt, where he talks, the big thing is, their social media, but the huge part of it is that American children and Canadian, kind of the whole Western world, now tend to have childhoods that are dominated by screens rather than by play. And so with screens, much like it would be with alcohol or substances, the word, of course, is delay, right? And just little kids. I mean, whenever time I see a 3-year-old in a stroller with an iPad, I want to go slap it out of their hands and shake the parents and say, I know you love your child. Please don't, right? Please don't. The hard part about technology, I'll sort of a few points that I make. The hard part about screens and technology is that while people can live successful lives and never gamble or never drink alcohol, we really don't, we're not in a place where we can have lives without technology. So the challenge is, how do we help children, and most importantly teens, learn to use technology in ways that support the best parts of themselves, right, and develop themselves, but without it being a problem. There's a great writer for The Atlantic named Derek Thompson who said, a lot of people want to talk about screens as though it were rat poison, right? That it's poisonous to everyone. It's more like alcohol, where it's a mild social lubricant, right? TikTok videos can be really funny. My sons learn to cook from them, and they're great. It's just that for like 20% of the population, it's really becomes a problem. So for us, I think for most people with technology, I don't worry about kids being on social media some, playing video games some. What I really worry about is what does it crowd out, right? If it crowds out sleep, if it crowds out on other activities, if it on, face-to-face time, all those kind of things. And so in What Do You Say, we have a chapter in talking with kids about sleep and technology, because this is so often intertwined as we talk about social media and video games and pornography, and how you would have those conversations. And apart from, you don't let kids have screens at a young age. And then when you do introduce whatever, you really want to talk about for weeks, if not months in advance, what the plans are going to be, what the rules are going to be, knowing that the rules are going to change over time. But we tend to just give it to kids, and then we try to dial it back. And then we've given away a lot of leverage at the very beginning. But if you have kids who are using, anything too much, sometimes we have a power play, but you really, really want to do that as a last resort. It would be the same thing with too much screen time as it is with kids smoking too much weed. Obviously, any weed is too much in my mind. But so tell me what you get out of this. We really want to start by understanding, what need do they feel like video games are filling, right? But for some kids, this is the way that they connect with friends. They're otherwise socially awkward or socially anxious. And this is where they do it. It's a place where they actually feel competent, right? There are many valid reasons that kids are on screens. The hard part is always just the balance. We also talk about the one of the things about video games, especially, in addition to the competence that you mentioned, is that they're designed, particularly first-person shooter games, they're designed that the better that I get, the harder the game gets. And so dopamine, the neurotransmitter, is released in the anticipation of rewards. So because you're playing in ways that you're always just about to beat the game and often fall short, it's constantly in the state of dopamine, and it's so exciting to your brain, which of course is the thing that leads it to be addictive, just like, cocaine or anything like this. And so there's a researcher a clinician in our area who works with screen addiction, and he talks about, there's not a problem with playing video games. It's just that you don't want to be doing it for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time. You want to oscillate between high dopamine activities and low dopamine activities, right? Video games, and then go play guitar. Video games, go for a walk. Video games, walk the dog, whatever it happens to be. Set the table, do your reading, because otherwise we're wiring brains in ways that are not really healthy. But I'll show. There's a story in there, because we're trying to move in the direction of how do we help kids learn to regulate for themselves their own use of technology. There's a story in there. Fortnite came through our family when my son was a sophomore in high school, like a biblical plague. It's a brilliantly designed game. It's really fun. It's engaging, with friends and everything else. So my son is a musician. Matters a little bit, I think. So he has, on Thursday night, he's telling me, he has Friday off from school, and says, what are you going to do with your day tomorrow? And I'm hoping to say, I'm going to write a song, I'm going to learn a song, whatever. And he smiles and says, play Fortnite. And I'm like, great. Anything else planned? I'll think about it. Okay. And so I go to work. I get home on Friday, 6:00 on Friday afternoon. There's my kid blowing things up, having a whale of a good time. Still, mind you, in his pajamas. And I'm like, I admit to being a little bit hot. And I'm like, Matthew, can you finish up? I really don't care. And could you get dressed, right? Because remember, we were supposed to go out for pizza. I was kind of mad, I must be honest. And my son's really easygoing. He says, oh yeah, sure, no problem. So he finishes up. I managed to calm down. I say nothing more. Perfectly lovely dinner. Saturday, I say nothing. Sunday morning, I say nothing. About 5:00 on Sunday is when boys, especially, particularly ADHD ones, realize, oh shoot, tomorrow, oh dang. And now he's so mad. I can't believe I haven't done any work. It's 5. I wasted my whole day on Friday. Why didn't I do something? And if ever there was like a serve for a spike in your face, but I told you so, parental thing, he was like in a silver platter. But we were writing this book, so that feel like the wrong words to use. So I whip out the empathy and validation. I say, oh man, boy, you look pretty frustrating, huh? Honestly, been there. I did that a lot in high school. I know how frustrating that can be. Can I ask you a question? Sure. Try to get by him. Do you know roughly how long you spent playing Fortnite on Friday? 8, 9 hours maybe? Wow. Was it fun? It was great. Yeah, we did such and such, blah, blah. Great. One more question. How many hours do you think you would have needed to play to get your Fortnite fix and then maybe not feel like you wasted air quotes your whole day? He's like, maybe 4, 5? Oh, one more question. In the future, would it help if mom or I, would try to help you just manage that a little bit so you can play and get your kicks in, but not feel like you kind of took up the whole day? Yeah, that'd be good. And so I very consciously went about it this way because my kid is ADHD. I mean, when he was a toddler, we could leave him at the convenience store watching Kino, and he'd come back 3 weeks later. He'd still be there as long as someone fed him. He's just transfixed by screens. And I know it's just the way his brain is wired. But I also knew that he was 2 years before heading off to university with hopes and dreams and a suitcase full of our money. And I just couldn't have it be my job for him as a 15-year-old to manage his use of technology when it had to be his job to figure out how to manage this. And he was mad. He was really upset with himself. And I'm like, that's fantastic that he's upset. And to your brilliant insight, emotionally, I took his side and understood his frustration. I didn't beat him up with him. And I have to say, I mean, he's still ADHD. He still does things that make you shake your head and wonder a little bit like, wow, really? But he is also an unbelievable human being. And he has every year at college gotten more A's in a given year than I made all 4 years of college. I mean, he couldn't be doing better.
That's awesome. Is he finished now?
He has one semester
One
left.
semester left.
He took with his brain tumor, he took his COVID, he took his cancer gap semester
Right.
at
Right.
the local children's hospital. But he's doing great.
That's awesome.
And he's still ADHD, but but part of the job of all of us is to figure out the brain that we got and how do we navigate the world. My writing part is saying nobody gets everything,
Yeah.
right? He's not his mom. He's not on top of the way she is, but boy, oh boy, does he have some skills and gifts that make you go, oh my word.
Yeah. He's gonna be good. Gonna be fine.
Oh, he's a wonderful human.
Well, thank you so much. I'll just close by asking you the question that I ask all my guests. And I know you've answered it before, so I'm sure you don't remember your answer, but it'll be curious if you gave the same answer or not, because I remember what it was. If you could go back in time to your younger parent self, what advice would you give yourself?
Right now, what's top of mind for me is I would have gotten more sleep.
That's the same thing you said last time. So
Is
you're
it really?
consistent. Yes.
Good. Yeah. Part of it, I stayed up late with friends last night, but it's raising kids is hard, right? If you're really doing it the way that you want to be doing, you put a ton of energy into it, right? And there are things you can't control. And well, I mean, the wonderful writer Lisa D'Amour, says that sleep's the thing it's the glue that holds us together.
Mhm.
Right. And so I do have friends, and my kid as well, people who can get along seemingly really well with not enough sleep. But most of us, well, at the very least, we are not going to be our best selves when we're tired and sleep deprived. And we don't have to be perfect, right? The kids don't need perfect parents, thank goodness. Because I think I shared before, the only perfect parents that I know are people who don't have children, right? And for the rest of us, right? So yeah, so I stick with that and take the long view. Take the long view. I mean, if it's so hard, I mean, it's your first time having a 3-year-old, the first time having a 13-year-old, first time having, and when things go sideways, you're like, oh my goodness. And of course you're worried because you love your kid with all of your heart and you start worrying they're going to be, right. But if you could take the long view and say, this is just part of their plan. I mean, sorry, part of their path. It's not in its plan, but this is where it is. I have friends who are in town and was telling them about kind of my misadventure, my parents and they just shook their head and they say, I'm so sorry. And I said, listen, my parents did the best they could. It's not the way that anyone probably would have drawn it up, but and it was really hard for me. But I really like the person that I am. I like the life that I have. And I'm not for sure whether I have the life that I have in spite of everything that was hard for me, or perhaps because of everything that was hard for me. I'll say that it's sure easy for me to roll with stuff, to say, well, it's not that big a deal, because compared to, it's really not that big a deal. So
I kind of think that you help, that the way that you help people is probably because of the life that you had. Because I think that you have such a deep level of empathy of people's experience that if you'd had an easier life, maybe it wouldn't be that easy for you to empathize with all the struggles that people have. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% right. And I think it's also easier for me to be courageous, going back to where we started this conversation, courageous and then face really hard stuff, because I've gone through really hard stuff. I mean, think about any epic, cartoon movie or whatever, the hero or heroine, whoever he or she is, you got to go in there and fight the dragon, right? And get knocked down and beat up and singed and everything else, right? And you don't learn to be courageous unless you face some stuff that's kind of hard. And courageous, someone just showed me a quote, is John Wayne, right? Courageous is being scared as hell and mounting up anyway.
Yeah.
Say, well, we're just going to go do it.
Yeah. I love that. And I used to tell that to my kids when they were little, that, if something's not scary, you don't need to be brave, right? Like, it's like,
such an elegant way to phrase that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to borrow that one.
Go for it. Well, thank you so much. Where's the best place for people to go? We'll put links in the show notes too, but best place for people to go and find out more about you and what you do.
So our website is theselfdrivenchild.com, and you can read more about Bill and me there. And if you want us to talk to you or talk to your school or whatever, like you, we just like to help. We just like to help. I goof around on TikTok. I probably got a little bit, when I get wound up, a little bit of manic energy. Ned Johnson on TikTok. And
awesome. And you're on Instagram too as the other Ned Johnson.
Yep, same thing. Same thing there, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. As usual, it's been such a pleasure. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Oh, thank you for yours. I mean, you're such a force of good.
Aw, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.